Isabel, Ava, the directors of Miu Miu Women's Tales number 21 and 5, thank you for joining us tonight. I'm going to start with you, Isabel, if I may. And I'd like to start exactly where all of these women's tales conversations begin, which is with the brief, which specifically was to create a short film using the latest Miu Miu Women's Tales women's wear collection. It's an open brief, which for some artists, of course, can be a mixed blessing. Some people like something to kick against. I'm interested to know, Isabel, how was it for you? What did you think when you first heard Mrs. Prada's brief?
For me, as an artist, I actually work well with parameters and boundaries. When I'm given a sort of directive and limitations of what I can work with, it actually inspires my creativity and resourcefulness, and that allows me to hone in on an idea of what to do. And at the time that Miu Miu approached me, I was just finishing a draft of my screenplay, Tropical Gothic, which is set in the 16th century in the Philippines. But I thought the short from Miu Miu would be an excellent opportunity for me to test out some ideas that I had for my feature screenplay. And that's what I tried to do with Shangri-La, essentially.
The actual result is quite unexpected, you might say, because the spring collection is in fact quite futuristic, all those beads, and yet in your artist statement to accompany the film, you cite the famous 1930s migrant mother image by the FSA photographer Dorothea Lange as a sort of starting point. Very, very different. Is it common for you to find out that you in fact saw something completely different from what was everybody else saw in a reference? Is it usual for you to go off at a tangent?
Certainly, and looking at the lookbook for Miu Miu, when I see costumes and when I see clothes, cinematically, they tell a story. It could tell, it says much about a person's identity, their background, where they came from, but I also think of the possibilities in the future, what's in store. And for me, there's, really a through line between the past through the present, through the future. And what I did with Shangri-La essentially was to revisit and I think capture a perspective that's often overlooked in American history, especially during the early part of the 20th century, and it's about the Filipino immigrant.
And where would the costume normally fall in the sequence of events? I'm conscious that you've got so many different roles. I mean, you're in Shangri-La, you're of course directing and you're producing and you're writing, but meanwhile you're also acting, and then you're instructing a whole team of operatives and other artists. But would costume usually be something that is part of the kind of concept driving element, or is it something that would come at the end?
It comes as I'm writing the screenplay. And so, I wanted to tell a story about this woman, a Filipino immigrant farm worker during the Great Depression. And this is a time in California where there were anti-miscegenation laws prohibiting marriage between people of different races.
Can I ask a more specific question about the actual method in which you did it, perhaps? Because I'm conscious of the close-ups, of course, and the idea that there's actually a formal device happening. You see the sparkles of the garments, but then you're also keying into the monologue about the canopy of fireworks, and you feel this kind of together, the costume and the plot line is kind of driving this really sensual momentum. Is that what you mean when you're talking about the kind of writing, making all those other elements coalesce?
Essentially, I have the story and then I revisit the lookbook and see these outfits, and I get inspiration as I'm looking at the lookbook and incorporate that into my story.
You've said that in the past that you are drawn to characters with secrets. And your previous feature films have told stories about sex workers who are trying to make a fresh start and yet under threat of exposure, or of course with lingua franca, the undocumented migrant worker who is living in jeopardy of exposure in lots of different ways. Can you tell us a little bit about how you thought about fleshing out the character for Shangri-La?
I think interest and predilection for women with secrets is, I think, a way for me as a storyteller to provide an opening and exploring the inner emotional and imaginative life of these women, you know, what they are underneath the surface that other people don't see. And in the case of Shangri-La, when we think of, you know, the farmers and farm workers during the Great Depression, whether they're white or people of color, we almost always look at them from an economic or political standpoint. And with Shangri-La, I thought this was a great opportunity for me to explore this Filipino woman's interior, sensual, and emotional life. And so, although it starts out as a kind of rendezvous between her and her lover halfway through the film, it becomes purely a rhapsody and an exploration of alternate lives and alternate worlds where she can be truly free and free to love whomever she wants to.
Ava, thank you for patiently letting me drill down into Shangri-La. If I could ask you a little bit about your film collective Array acquiring Isabel's most recent feature, Lingua Franca, her third feature for theatrical distribution in North America last summer, I think it was. Could you tell us a little bit about how you came to know about Isabel's work and what it was specifically about Lingua Franca that appealed to Array?
Well, I'm so happy to be in the space with her. She's a filmmaker that I greatly admire. It was an honor for us as Array. We're a distribution collective that's dedicated to the work of women and people of color. It was a thrill to be able to distribute her work in the United States. It was brought to my attention, her film, by Mercedes Cooper, who's our VP of programming. And she'd seen this film and she was head over heels about it, and she invited it to be at a small festival that we run on the campus. And so that's how it came to my attention. We watched it, Tulane Jones and I, who had Array releasing, and thought, we want to put our elbow grease and our Black girl magic and all of our, connections and networking behind Isabel's vision. And she had a beautiful release in the summer of a crazy summer. It was a crazy summer, so much going on. But this film was really a balm for me as a distributor, and also just quite inspirational as a filmmaker. She has such a strong voice, a very distinct voice. And I just found myself kind of relaxing into her film, learning about things that I didn't know about, but also feeling a great familiarity there, which really speaks to the idea that there's a compatibility between universality and the specific. And if you allow yourself to be in a space where you can inhabit both, you can be looking at a very specific story and feel the universe within the characters. And that's how I feel when I watch Isabel's work, particularly Lingua Franca. So we're so proud to have it a part of the Array family.
Thank you. Isabel, you've mentioned a couple of Array projects that you felt were especially meaningful to you, and in the context of the conversations about them distributing your film. And you mentioned Burning Cane by Philip Eusmans as being specifically meaningful to you. Can you say something a little bit about that, and what difference it's made for you to have Array's kind of support in practical terms? What's it enabled you to do?
Certainly, it's not just Burning Cane, but also most recently Residue, which I have the honor of being nominated for the Independent Spirit Award this year. I think Array's roster Array is not just concerned about releasing films that are immediately marketable or commercial, but important films, important American cinema that's complex, that's challenging, that's truly visionary. And these are works that are not just going to be discussed, the year that they release, but they're going to be discussed for years to come. And that's why I've said in, a number of places that Array is not just building a filmography, but a new American canon. And I'm so honored and privileged to be part of, the films that it's released these last 10 years. Congratulations, Tor.
10-year anniversary. Thank you. Thank you.
Ava, I'm fascinated by something that I read in a couple of the interviews that Isabel gave around the time. of the acquisition, where she described something that sounded a bit like a pep talk, in which you were talking about auteurship, the two of you. And she said that it had given her enormous confidence to pursue a very specific vision. I wonder what you're prepared to share from that conversation and tell us about that advice, because it sounds like kind of extreme mentorship that we should all know about.
What conversation was this, Isabel? Refresh my memory.
I quote the words. She said you were talking about auteurship and the idea of being able to think of yourself as an artist and an all-round creative, a singular perspective, and not having to speak about yourself as necessarily a collaborative, and have an auteur's view where you're a singular creative. Can you, and that seems to be clear about the way your work is turning with Shangri-La. So hence me drilling down into this very old clipping. Forgive me, Ava.
Ava, I think I was referring to our internal array conversation prior to the release of the film, and how we were going to position it, and how we're going to present me as truly the author and the auteur behind the film.
Oh yeah, okay, I understand. No, I think that there is a real challenge with claiming the word auteur as women filmmakers. The terrain of that word seems to be, one that's climbed by men, and that a woman who is writing, producing, directing, and starring in her own work. Didn't you edit? I think you edited at some points as well, and designed every aspect of it, truly can take the mantle of auteurship. And the idea that we felt that we could truly mount a campaign that positioned her in that way, in every aspect of our materials, the poster, the places that we were booking the film, the conversation around the film needed to be to position her in this way, because that is what she's doing. And yet, as I looked through past clips of her, publicity clips and marketing clips, I felt that was not at the forefront, that she should be regarded in that way. And the way to be regarded in that way is to speak it and claim it. And so that's a lot of what we tried to do. And I think we achieved in the campaign, which is so much further to go. But with Isabel, we weren't working with a new filmmaker. I mean, this is a filmmaker who's made 3 features. And so, she is, our next film, she'll be considered, out of emerging and into a mid-career filmmaker. And, the sky's the limit. So let's start using the right vocabulary and the right language about her.
Wow, that's proper mentorship. We talk about mentorship a lot in the Women's Tales conversations and the panels that we have, but often we can't ever get an exact example of the kinds of advice that people should be getting. And it sounds like we just had a perfect example. Thank you. Which brings us back, of course, to the Shangri-La, Isabel, which is constructed around an internal monologue, precisely this sense of single viewpoint, this interiority that you're often talking about, that you've been able to summon with this new mentorship and this new auteur's vision. You've called that specific viewpoint, quote, sexual desire from the perspective of a trans woman in American cinema. Tell us more.
Certainly, I feel that cinema in general privileges the male gaze, when it comes to sexual desire. And I rarely see the female gaze, let alone the trans female gaze, depicted on screen. And that's why, I don't want to say the word pioneer, but I tried to do that with Lingua Franca. I had a few sensual scenes where you can really see it's about the trans woman desiring and experiencing sexual pleasure without any guilt or shame. And I wanted to revisit that again with Shangri-La. But like Lingua Franca, it's set in a setting and milieu that's fraught sociopolitically. It's against the backdrop of anti-miscegenation at that time. And for that reason, I feel there's something that's truly subversive and defiant about that, for this otherwise powerless and voiceless woman to articulate that, that desire, even internally or with her lover, is, I think, something powerful.
Ava, you were the director of the 5th Miu Miu Women's Tale way back in 2013 entitled The Door. And I think that means that it falls somewhere between Middle of Nowhere and Selma. So pretty amazing transitional moment. And in the time that's passed, I'm sure you've heard plenty said about women-only competitions or series like The Women's Tales, and the whole politics of whether it's good to have a single sex competition, etc. I wonder what you feel about that now with all that's passed since, and whether you feel that they're still necessary, they'll always be necessary.
They're going to be necessary for the rest of our lifetimes, for sure. And I just don't think that there's something to be shied away from. You know, I have not only do I have no problem, I have a preference for being regarded as a Black woman filmmaker. Some of my colleagues just want to be a filmmaker. I prefer to be a Black woman filmmaker, not even just a woman filmmaker, right? The specificity in that is something that I'm proud of, something that I wear as a badge of honor, and something that gives me a very specific gaze that I lean into in my work. Everyone's different. But for me, when we're thinking about spaces like Women's Tales, the idea that there is something negative about it is something that I'm really allergic to, because I experienced only beauty from the program, and I've seen other women do the same. I mean, I call the film The Door. Ultimately, there's a door involved in the film, but really, it was a door for me. It felt like a door when Verdi Visconti reached out to me and invited me to make that film. It was at a very tender time in my career. I had won Sundance and had nothing else in the horizon. There was no array to release the work. There was no place to go. There was no easy path in terms of what I would do next as an independent filmmaker who's trying to tell another kind of story. Like literally after Sundance, there were no offers. There were from films. There were two offers, one for me to make a documentary, which I did make for ESPN, and the other was from Prada to, can you imagine this? Come play in our clothes and we'll give you money to make a movie. What? Is this a dream? Are you kidding? Who are you? Are you a real person? Are you really calling me from Europe, lady? What's going on? Like really, it was such a dream. And the experience was such a dream. And it was a doorway into me thinking in a more expansive way about what was possible for me narratively, creatively, production-wise, budget-wise. So it was so formative. I have nothing but positive things to say about it, and the women who've gone through the program since, some having made, Isabel's much more experienced than I was when I made my film. Miranda is much more experienced than I was when I made mine. The fact that the program has welcomed in women filmmakers at all different levels of their maturity as a filmmaker is a gift. And so nothing but kudos. And, you know, I hope that it continues to inspire, you know, other such initiatives. Any place where women can gather, I think, is a sacred place. And so nothing but hats off and warm feelings about this.
Great answer. Isabel, you have described yourself as, and I will never forget this epithet, I don't think I'd read it before, a gold star minority. You're a woman of color who's also a migrant, who's also trans. I'm interested to know how you therefore feel in the context of this conversation about the achievement of being the first trans woman of color to submit in competition at the Venice Film Festival. What does that kind of first mean for you?
I look at it pragmatically in the sense that I would hope that it emboldens and empowers other people and underrepresented voices and artists like myself to go out there and make their own work and their own films. I encountered quite a number of pushbacks creatively, logistically, and just in terms of a belief and trust in my vision. And I fought that resistance all the way through, of course, with the help of my producers, who are also Filipino immigrants like myself. And so I would want people to look hopefully at the success of Lingua Franca in collaboration with Array and Ava, and the fact that now I'm being repped by CAA and have the same agent as Ava.
We have the same agent.
Yes, that it would hopefully become a case study for people to follow their own voice and trust in their own instincts without compromising are dumbing down their vision, because that's how you distinguish yourself, as a sensibility and as a perspective in Hollywood.
Ava, when I put that question down for Isabel, I then looked up your firsts. And I think I need to draw quite a deep breath for this moment. You're the first Black woman to win at Sundance, the first Black woman to have her film nominated for an Oscar, the first Black woman to direct a live action film earning more than $100 million at the US box office, ... I think the words "the first" come up 13 times in your opening paragraph of your Wikipedia entry of that. How do you feel about firsts? These are amazing, not to ever undermine any of those achievements or indeed to disparage those organizations. Is there a tiny bit of you that's also looking forward to the moment that all the firsts are done?
I don't think, that's not what I think of when I think about the first. I think of the fact that it is bittersweet, and that the firsts mean it's the first person that was deemed worthy by a power structure that is not of our making.
Yeah, good answer.
But certainly the first Black woman to do all of these things you mentioned was not me. The first Black woman to make something that had nuance and beauty and political edge and had whatever people see in my films. I'm by far not the first, but unfortunately the first that our industry allowed to take that mantle. And so it's bittersweet. I don't accept it as a badge of honor. I accept it as an indication of how far behind our industry is, that in 2015 is the first time a Black woman was ever nominated for a Globe, that in 2017 is the first time a Black woman was ever nominated in the documentary category for the Oscars. The first, that Selma in 2015 is the first time that a Black woman ever had this is nuts, it's insanity. And so, the bittersweet, some days it's more sweet, some days it's so bitter, because what it really says is history is far behind the true accomplishments of women in cinema, and it doesn't lag far behind the rest of the world, and celebrating the true accomplishments of women across all strata of public life. And so we need to keep that in mind before we start putting crowns on our heads, right? And really buckle down and do the work and be sober about what it really means. And that allows me to move forward with more focus, and to make sure that more people are coming in along with me. And that's one of the reasons why Array exists. That's one of the reasons why we're looking for and wanting to champion and further and foster the careers of women like Isabel, so that we can get there a little faster. Maybe we'll see some big change in our lifetimes, but definitely the next generation behind us will have some good shoulders to stand on.
Well, then let's finish with the sweet. Can we have a scoop, Ava? Can you tell us a little bit about what's next for Array and for you personally? I've heard about a series and also a feature.
Oh gosh, there's so much going on. Well, it's our 10th year anniversary, so we're taking all year to celebrate that. We've got the launch of Array Crew, which is our first tech platform. We have a chief technology officer that we've brought in to create inclusive crews across all film and television. So if Isabel wants a Filipinx gaffer or dolly grip, all she has to do is go in a database and she'll find all kinds of brown people and women and all kinds of people with disabilities, people who may be older, folks who are unrepresented in our industry. So that's our big next initiative I'm working on. Right now I'm writing the film Cast based on Isabel Wilkerson's book. That'll be my next film. And we have 6 different television shows in production, from animated to non-scripted to series, and across 7 different networks. So one of them being on 2 different networks. So we're really excited. And it's a time of great change in our world. And so we're embracing that and trying to apply it to our art as well.
Fantastic. Isabel, what about you? What can you tell us, if anything, about the 4th feature, Tropical Gothic?
Yes, so Tropical Gothic is set in the 16th century in the Philippines, very early during the Spanish colonial regime, and it's about a native priestess who becomes dispossessed. Her property and farm are seized from her and handed over to a Spanish historian who becomes her master and landlord. And she pretends to be possessed by the spirit of her Spanish master's dead wife in order to psychologically manipulate him. So as Spain exploits the Philippines economically and politically, the native priestess colonizes her master emotionally and psychologically. It's ultimately an allegory about colonialism. And I wanted to make that my follow-up feature because now that I have hopefully more capital in the industry, I want to leverage that to make stories that ultimately matter to me and that would not get made if I did not have this opportunity. So I really want to seize this chance to tell a story that matters for me and for the Filipino American community as well.
Well, that's a great optimistic place to stop. Thank you so much, Isabel Sandoval. Thank you, Eva DuVernay.
Thank you, Ava. Thank you, Penny.